Let's switch gears, though, Ben, to Europe, because we've been watching closely for years now, like the rise of far-right political parties in Europe. The trajectory has felt quite bad for a while. I think we were speculating on the show earlier this year that we could be heading towards far-right parties controlling big swaths of Germany in 2026, and then even the French presidency in 2027. That obviously could still happen, but there have been some bumps in the road thanks to our president, Donald Trump, because it turns out that trying to annex Greenland is not that popular. It turns out that starting an idiotic war with Iran is not that popular. And here's some evidence for you guys. So the most obvious impact of Trump's policies come to us from Denmark. Folks probably remember Denmark governs Greenland. The Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, called early elections to capitalize on her popularity after she got in this big fight with Trump over Greenland. We don't have results as of this recording, but going into the race, she was seen as the front runner. And there was a great piece in The Atlantic this week about how the far-right nationalist populist Danish People's Party in Denmark went from super pro-Trump to one of its members saying, quote, "Let me put it in words you might understand, Mr. Trump, fuck off." So that's a bit of a change. In Italy, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni's right-wing government just lost a judicial reform referendum pretty badly. It was 54-46. The underlying issues are pretty technical and wonky, so we're just going to skip past them because they don't really matter for this. But what you should know is it became seen as a referendum on Giorgia Meloni, and she lost. And now she's seeing headlines like this one from Politico, quote, "Referendum defeat brings Italy's Meloni crashing down to earth," right? So that's just, again, the mood music is bad for her. In Slovenia, there was a parliamentary election over the weekend, and the center-left Freedom Party is barely leading the right-wing Democratic Party. But this race has interesting ties to Viktor Orban in Hungary, and an organization called Black Cube that is near and dear to our hearts here at Pod Save the World.
Old friends of mine.
Yeah, so let's put a pin in that one and come back to it. And then finally, Ben, in France, there were a bunch of municipal elections. The results were a mixed bag. The far-right National Rally Party had some successes, but like every party had some successes. The centrists had some successes. The left had some. But National Rally won seats in smaller towns and smaller cities, but failed to win its biggest target, which is Marseille, which is France's second biggest city. And it's also in a region that is a stronghold for the National Rally and has been for a while. Emmanuel Gregoire, the center-left socialist, he won the runoff election in Paris. National Rally continues to do terribly in Paris. But then, interestingly, Ben, in previous elections, the key to defeating the far right was getting all the parties from the center to the left united in opposition. But I was listening to, I think, this BBC political analyst talking about how in this past election, a lot of the socialist parties fared better if they rejected the far left because the far left has become so toxic under Mélenchon. So it's a bit of a mess. I guess I'm going to choose to take a little bit of hope away from these results, while also steeling myself for the reality that, an economic crisis or a migration crisis because of the Iran war is the kind of thing that will fuel the far right in Europe. And also, these are very low turnout elections, while the presidential elections see closer to 75, 85%. But any takeaways from you based on what you watched?
So a couple of small things and then the big thing, right? So on Slovenia, there are a lot of converging threads here for Pod Save the World listeners, because one thing is Black Cube is this group of former Mossad agents that spied on me back in the good old days of the first Trump term, I think widely they traffic in these kind of far right circles. So they also notably have done some work in Hungary over the years to discredit Viktor Orban's opponents. And so shortly before the election, a few days, a group of journalists and activists in Slovenia did their own investigation, and it exposed these Black Cube ties to the far-right candidate who was way up in the polls in Slovenia. One of them was Nika Kovac, who's a friend of mine who's been on this podcast before talking about her advocacy on reproductive rights in Europe. And that did not go over well in Slovenia. Because people saw it as foreign election interference. A bunch of former Mossad people making contact with the far right there to help him come to power. And so you had this surge at the end for the very progressive prime minister of Slovenia, and you essentially had a photo finish. and actually a slight lead for the progressive. Now, we'll see what happens in government formation, et cetera, but a significant underperformance in Slovenia for the far right in Slovenia, which is often seen as kind of a bellwether, of where politics are going in Central Europe, particularly ahead of the Hungarian election in April. So that's good. In Italy, Meloni, these constitutional referendums have often been bellwethers. So Matteo Renzi, for instance, was the more progressive prime minister of Italy at the end of the Obama years. He staked a lot on a constitutional referendum to amend, the electoral laws in Italy. He lost, and that was seen as kind of, letting the air out of the balloon for Renzi. He lost the next general election. Now Meloni, she had a kind of odd political strategy with this referendum. At first, she kind of didn't campaign that hard for it, but then she got involved. She definitely lost. She lost significantly. And so this kind of aura invincibility around her has been punctured. And she's the most talented far-right politician in Europe.
By far, yeah.
So by far. And I talked to some friends there who said that in the last days of the campaign, all the energy, right, in the streets and online was with the opposition. Suddenly young people are getting motivated to oppose Meloni. That's a big deal. And so then that leads me to kind of where are we big picture? Well, look, this could still go horribly wrong. Like they could still win the French presidential election. They could still make gains in Germany, the far right over time. But we're not seeing that kind of groundswell. Like even in mixed results in France, people were worried there was going to be like this wave of national rally candidates getting elected. That didn't happen. And I think Trump's recklessness and his interventions in European politics are not helping these far-right parties.
Yeah,
and that to me is the headline. People can see this is what far-right leadership looks like. I don't know if I want that. And I certainly don't want Donald Trump and J.D. Vance coming over here and trying to mess around in my politics, or for that matter, Bibi Netanyahu and Black Cube.
Yeah, and lecturing me and like trying to ride herd and tell us what to do. Ben, did you see who won the mayoral race in the little French town of Arcis-sur-Aube?
I missed it.
Hitler. Charles Hitler.
What?
Charles Hitler with two T's.
Didn't see that one coming. Yeah.
He's an independent candidate who won his re-election over Zelensky. Antoine Zelensky. This is a real thing that happened in France.
Did you find this?
Charles
or is
Hitler.
This just, this is.
I was
incredible.
watching some what's like French 24, like some YouTube thing, and they did a big piece on Chucky Hitler. Look, what that tells me is dream big dreams, kids. Because most of you would probably think if your last name is Hitler, you can't run for office. But Charles showed the naysayers wrong.
Wouldn't you explore a name change? If you're a politician, especially.
Go with the silent H or something. Hitler.
Yeah.
Anything else.
Hither. There's drop an H in there, and Hither's a nice.
Or
come hither.
Yeah, Hank Charles, like flip him around. I don't know anything else.